Welcome to Leap Listens. I'm Sarah McGregor.
And I'm Roger Kalis.
Leap Listens is brought to you by Leap Create. We are a people communications agency and we work with organisations to help communicate their culture, to attract and recruit candidates, and to engage and retain employees through creative and digital projects and campaigns.
In today's episode, we're joined by Dan Turner, the multi-award-winning head of creative at TMP Worldwide. And I'd also add to that a very modest and thoroughly lovely chap. We're going to be discussing how... Don't laugh, it's true. We're going to be discussing how creativity goes beyond just the eye candy that's unveiled in a client presentation and how it can be woven into your strategy and solution. In fact, probably should be woven into it. So welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So Dan, give us a quick introduction about you and your role at TMP.
My role at TMP. I've been at TMP for knocking on for a decade now, and I've been creative director for most of that time. But recently, we moved into the role of joint head of creative. So that's still a relatively new thing for me. But yeah, no, it's been a really, 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 really good period. Lots of change, obviously, a lot going on in general for everybody. You know, inside the agency and outside, but for me too. So yeah, my role is to jointly run the team. So I'm a writer by background. And my co-head of creative, Matt, is the art direction side, and together we are responsible for what you would imagine is the case, which is the team, the quality of the creative product, the relationships with the clients from the creative side. Yeah, that's really what we do and what I do, and I thoroughly enjoy it.
It's great. I love the fact that your dog's joining in the back.
Yeah.
I came upstairs to try and avoid that.
That's okay.
No, it's good. Do you know what? We haven't had too many dogs, actually. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, first dog, what's his name? Give him a bit of airtime.
Oh, this is Molly. Yeah, Molly is a 2.5-year-old cockapoo. She's lovely, but she
likes the sound of her own voice.
You said it. You said it.
So, Dan, within our industry, what do you think the term creative actually means?
Well, I think that there's two things, isn't there? Firstly, is what it means the majority of the time, and perhaps what I'd like it to mean more regularly. And the majority of the time, it is about things even those people who don't work in advertising understand it to be about, which is about interesting and unexpected language, kind of vibrant visuals, lovely kind of films and websites. It can be about an advertising campaign that's integrated, that touches lots of different channels, that excites and moves and delights an audience. And it's all of those things, right? And we do lots of that on a regular basis, and it works. I mean, if it didn't work, none of us would have a job, none of us would be here. We wouldn't even be talking about it on this lovely podcast of yours. So there is that, of course, right? But what I'd like it to happen more often, I would say, going forwards, and something we're talking about a lot internally at TMP, which is how do we then move it into a space where the creatives, for want of a better expression, are further upstream of the conversation, and then injecting ourselves into what you might call a solutions thinking methodology, which is to say, rather than getting a brief where the client says, I want one of these, and you go and make it, website, film, whatever, we get into the room at the start and say, actually, let's just stop a second. What actually is your issue? What is keeping you up at night, right? You know, what is it that if we solved it would have a material impact on your life, on your business, or will it save you money? Will it make you famous, Mr. or Mrs. Client? You know, what is it that will be transformative for you rather than just creating a suite of materials that, you know, does a job we all get paid for and we're all delighted about?
So that's actually very interesting, because my next question was, when should creative start in the project process? And it's really actually interesting to hear you say, actually, when a creative potentially is involved, the output could be very different to what the original request was.
I'm a big believer that creatives are not just the recipients of briefs, but are very able to and should be involved in co-creating the brief where possible, right? Which means getting involved in the meetings with the clients, running a sort of creative workshop if that's at all possible at the start of a process. So, you know, rather than having our questions and our views filtered through client service or other colleagues, much as, you know, as they had an awful lot of value, having us in the room at the time to sort of just ask us the questions we want answering and in the way that we want answering, and also spotting the messages that are unsaid or the things that happen between the lines and say, oh, can you tell me more about that? Or that was an interesting reveal there. Or, you know, there was something in your body language about that thing you mentioned that sounded like it was something that was important to you. So tell me a little bit more about that. And so often that can help in terms of insights, but it also helps I'm a writer, but it helps in phraseology. The amount of times a sort of strapline comes out of some unguarded comment made by a client is, too frequent to mention. So the more we can get involved at that stage, rather than, say, being the passive recipients of a brief further down the line, I think you get much more sophisticated output. Added to which, I think it adds to that sense of the client trusting the creative and is therefore much more likely to buy whatever solution you put in front of them if they've got that bond that starts at the start of the process. So ideally, that's what I would like.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So when we say creative should be a solution, not just an output, it's ensuring, I guess, that strategy's in place and the creative's being used for the right purpose. And I guess it means, in some cases, behavioural change. What tools do you have to use to weaving in creativity to make sure that it aligns with a strategy and becomes a solution for a client?
I think that the way we like to work at TMP, and I certainly like to work, is where creative and strategy intermingle. Right, they're often different departments and different things, but there's a part of the Venn diagram where they sort of sit in the middle together. And I think that there's all sorts of well-worn tools, but well-worn because they're useful, that I like to get involved in employing, if you like, in various parts of a project, like things like magic quadrant analysis, so that you're sort of plotting on a sort of square graph your client's position in the marketplace versus 5 or 6 of their competitors, maybe, right? So that when you come up with that lovely line later on, or that lovely idea, or that concept, you'll be able to sense check it and say, actually, does that create clear blue water between my client and the rest? And if not, why not? And I just strayed into the territory of creating something that sounds like everybody else. It's good quality control mechanisms. That's good. It also adds a bit of science to the process as well. Clients do like the sort of what they perceive as being the sort of wizardry of creative work. But if you add science to the process that shows them that you've thought about their issues and their sort of position in the marketplace, not just come up with a lovely sounding piece of whatever work it is, that also helps get that work sold. It also makes it more likely to work. I think that's key.
Yeah.
The other thing I like using often is the Jungian brand archetypes. Again, people have used that in various spaces. It's been used very much in its sort of consumer branding. We're using it more and more, I think, in employer branding. So, sometimes more, sometimes less. And I think that that's also about developing the personality of our organization. So in a space where lots of organizations are talking about lots of the same stuff, and sometimes the substance of what they're talking about can seem reasonably similar, getting the personality right of an organization can be a way of creating space between them and their competitors without necessarily talking about something that's substantively different. So I think that's a really, really nice way of communicating the personality of an organization. It sets us up to talk about tone of voice, sets us up to talk about culture, values. It's a really nice tool, I think, and it's useful with the right spaces.
Well, no, that's really good. And I was, it's funny enough, you mentioned earlier about going upstream, and that's a phrase I use a lot, and I stole it wholesale out of that Dave Trott book. But yeah, he talks about this very thing about going upstream of the problems. So not just doing what you're told, if you like, but going beyond that to say, well, what's actually the problem here? You've asked for this, but what's that? And I'm often saying that, I've been around a while now, and at the start of my career, like some of the magic was the doing because clients weren't able to do the doing. But now there's so many tools available to people with the smartphones and Canva and things that I think some of the magic has gone out of doing the work in terms of how people see creativity. So I feel like as creatives, what do you think that we need to be making sure we're swimming upstream to add the value that maybe has been taken away from some of the craft?
Yeah, it's a good one, isn't it? Because I think sometimes it's about craft in a professional sense of the word, but sometimes user-generated content in that scrappy sense is really, really good as well, right? You wouldn't want to create that because it's not authentic. I guess our job is in those cases, regardless of whether you're producing a really polished, controlled, in-agency piece of work, or you're creating a piece of work that will be brand advocate-led, and is therefore much more user-generated, is we set the rules, we set the path, right? So we don't just say, go and create whatever you like. We're saying the proposition is this, the strapline is this, the concept is this. We want brand advocates to go ahead and create their content, but bearing in mind this framework, bearing in mind this positioning. So like you say, some of the doing is being done by other people, but we still have to create the sort of path down which everybody travels.
Can you share any practical examples of creativity in action beyond the outputs?
Yes, absolutely. I think the value of the work that we did for Westminster City Council was about about being ambitious and making sure the partnership with the client was ambitious, because that film that we won an award for at the recent RAD Awards was one of many films that we shot for them as part of a suite, part of a campaign. And the value of it to me was not just that we had this really honest and raw and emotive kind of content, which was really valuable. It was that at the start of the process, the employer brand message that we hung all this on was called All Kinds of Extraordinary, right? Mm-hmm. And this is the value of a creative kind of client relationship. We said to them, we've created this idea because we like it, but it's based on a couple of stories you've shared with us, right? If you want to do this, because we'd love to do it, I think it'd be brilliant, it'd really stand out in the marketplace, but you have to be clear there's definitely multiple stories we can back it up with, So we're going to need 10 or 15 of these, right? What we don't want to do is sell you this idea, and then halfway through the project we realise there's only 3 or 4 really good stories, and the rest of them are all a bit meh. Do you know what I mean? So what you don't want to have that situation where you start off with this really bang exciting proposition, and you end up with something that's really, really vanilla at the end of the process. And so we said, only sign this off if you've got these stories, you can find these stories that you're prepared to share. And they went, don't worry about it. We absolutely do. Let's go for it. And so from that, you ended up with a sort of series of profile films, but done in a different way. Yes, we won that piece of work for the film around the woman who was inspired by the memory of a deceased brother. We also did stories around a lady who was in her mid-20s. She was born with cerebral palsy. She was pretty much written off by the medical community. They literally told her mum and dad she's never going to walk or talk or feed herself or I think they use the words amount to anything. It's so brutally awful, right? And a really, really terrible start to life, and also a very terrible judgment on this person and her potential. And she's just spent the last quarter of a century proving him wrong at every single turn, right? Every single turn. She's now to the point where she's won an apprenticeship of the year. She works in the centre of London. She's doing this brilliant work on behalf of other people from backgrounds similar to her. And we did a film story of her, right? And just telling her story. And there were others who were sort of using examples of how they'd been through mental health issues and now were advocates for that in the workplace. Somebody else was someone who had gone through school struggling and didn't realise what the issue was until they were diagnosed with dyslexia in their late teens, and are now advocates for teaching managers in the workplace how you manage people who are neurodiverse. And so you had this collection of sort of stories, and the output was great, to use your phrase from earlier on, but what really made it different was that ability for us to form the relationship with the client at the start and say, let's be ambitious together. And from that, the work rolled out the other side. It wouldn't have done so otherwise.
No, it's fantastic. And Dan, what's your advice to clients, agency relationship managers, and even creators themselves to ensure that creativity's value goes beyond just being that show and tell exercise that you reveal in a client presentation?
I think it's about trusting that the creative to work out with the client where the line is. Because I think the sweet spot with creative work is just the very tipping point of the client's risk appetite, if you like, right? And so if you go too early, you end up with something that's a bit maybe bland or vanilla, as I said before. Equally, if you go too far, the client thinks you don't understand them and there's no way they're ever going to sign this off. But of course, you never really know where the line is unless you're prepared to go over it, right? And so it's about trusting the creative to turn up and present something that might scare you, because you can roll them back to the place where your risk appetite and your brand and your client's purse strings will all kind of coalesce. And if you do that, you tend to get really nice pieces of work. And I think that it's about allowing the creative to be the agent provocateur, not just the brand police man or woman. Do you know what I mean? So if you have clients who trust the creatives to do that, I think that's where the best work gets made.
Yeah, it definitely all starts with trust, that's for sure.
Excellent. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been really interesting chatting to you, and also meeting Molly as well.
Yeah, it feels like she's gone quiet. There's not been gaffer tape involved, has there?
Not in this case. I think the next door neighbours are moving house and they've finally calmed down, so she's calmed down with them.
Excellent. So just our final question then, one we're asking all of our guests, is what's your current top reads or listens?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I tried, when I'm doing my top reads and top list, I tried to get out of the straightforward, I'm listening to this, I'm reading that. I've done all the books, I'm sure, Roger, you've read as well. You mentioned Dave Trott before, and I loved his kind of his work, and I loved some of the sort of campaign blogs and that sort of stuff. And I do that from time to time, and that's very much the case. But I try to take my brain out of that space and just listen to something else, because it refreshes my mind. I'm aware that I sit in front of a screen all day long reading words associated with the employer branding space, I do then need somewhere else to go with my brain. And so I tend to listen to an awful lot of podcasts. I listen to things like the News Quiz on Radio 4. I love things like, there's a big plethora of kind of political podcasts now where everyone seems to have left the BBC and suddenly they got the freedom to say what they like. And it's really refreshing to hear it, right? You've got people who are newsreaders now suddenly swearing on radio. It's like, oh, this is refreshing. So I like the idea of listening to those free voices suddenly talking about whatever they want to talk about. And so that tends to be my go-to space when I've left the office.
Here we go. Here's another free voice talking about
I think
what she wants to talk about. That's brilliant, Dan. Look, that is a very entertaining end.
Yeah, thank you, Dan and Molly.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Cheers, no worries. And thank you for listening to our Leap Listens podcast. To listen to other experts in the industry, head on over to our website. That's leapcreate.co.uk, or you can listen on Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcasts. And of course, if you have any people communication challenges requiring highly creative solutions, please reach out to me. I'm Roger, or Sarah McGregor on LinkedIn. Thanks very much.